Hello and welcome to Freedom Frontline. I hope you guys are having a good day. And it has been a very, very good week here at Freedom Frontline. Here I have with me our very own Mississippi State Auditor, Shad White. And Auditor, I'm so thrilled and thankful that you're with us today, sir. How you been?
Yeah, man, I'm good. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, man, so we went over to church this morning, my dad's church, Faith Baptist in Gulfport. They're hosting their National Beams Conference, so we were able to be there this morning and able to talk to a lot of faith leaders, and we were able to talk to a lot of good men that are doing, a lot of good work, not just here in Mississippi, but all over the nation, and more importantly, getting Bibles, to Christians all over the world. And Auditor, one thing that one of the gentlemen talked about was impact, and how it's important as we as men, how we are impacting our communities, and how we're impacting our families, and how we're impacting our government. And watching you over the last, couple of years as you being the state auditor, you have made a very large impact. You have created some waves in Jackson. And I see it as a good thing, because I think that's what we need. I think we need some of that in Jackson, Washington, D.C. And I think we need it, as close to home as possible as we can get. But before we get into all of that, let's talk a little bit about you, talk a little bit about your family, a little bit about your home life. And so just tell us a little bit about yourself, so our audience to kind of get to know you just a little bit.
Sure, yeah. I grew up in a little bitty town of 700 people in Jones County, so not too far from here. It was kind of funny today. We were together, and after the church service, met one of the pastors in the room, and he asked me where I was from. I said, Sandersville, this little bitty town. He said, oh, yeah, I used to be a pastor in Sandersville. So Right before I was born, he was the pastor, and then handed the reins off to Bud Swindle, who was later the pastor when I was growing up. So I grew up in a little bitty town. My dad's an oil field pumper. My grandfather was an oil field pumper. My mom was a school teacher. She's retired now. And I grew up in a great environment, and loved Mississippi, and knew at some point that I wanted to serve Mississippi in some kind of capacity. My dad, aside from being an oil field pumper, has for most of my life been a local elected official in the little bitty town I grew up in. And so he passed that message down to me that no matter what you do in life, service has to be a part of what you're doing. It's the reason that I joined the military and wanted to serve in the military, but it's also the reason that I'm grateful to be able to be state auditor and go to work every single day, because I get to be in this job where we look for fraud, waste, and abuse involving government funds. And I've got a great team in the auditor's office. There are about 130 employees. So you let off by saying we've rattled a few cages and shook the establishment up a little bit by finding waste. I have to say that I'm grateful to be able to do that every day, but I'm not able to do that without 129 other men and women at the auditor's office who are helping get that work done every single day. So I'm proud of the job that we've done, and grateful for the chance to do it.
You mentioned finding waste, and we're so glad that Donald Trump won, and that he
absolutely
won, this last election in November. And Elon has been doing just a phenomenal job with finding waste and fraud in D.C. Billions of dollars.
It's cool to be an auditor again, man.
Yeah,
it's great. It's the first time I've ever been cool. I feel great about that.
Yeah, I guarantee it. And so some people, I've heard people refer to you as, and I have referred to you as the Elon Musk of Mississippi. And, especially as conservatives, one thing that we as not just conservatives, but Republicans, whenever you look at the Republican platform, it's in our platform to want to not grow government. Yeah. And unfortunately, you get people in Jackson, you get people in D.C., or you get people in your county courthouse or your city hall, and they think that they have all the power.
Yeah.
One of the great strengths of George Washington, was whenever he became president, was the fact that he was willing to give the power back to the people. Mm-hmm. He gave the sword back to the people. The people gave him the sword. The people, gave it to him. And he said, no, it belongs to the people. Yeah. The power belongs to the people. And we need men and women in our capitals. We need men and women in D.C. and Jackson. We need them in our county courthouses and our city halls that has that mentality that the power does not belong, to them. Like you are the auditor, but you have been given that responsibility by the people of Mississippi.
That's right.
And that responsibility belongs to the people of Mississippi. And as long as you're doing a good job, then Mississippians want to keep electing you as a state auditor. You have that you have that job, that duty, and the people are the boss. And unfortunately, a lot of people get elected and they forget that responsibility that, this power was given to me by the people. Yeah. This power belongs to the people. Yeah. And those are the kind of people that we need in office.
Yeah, and that's what I try to live up to every single day. I like to say we were Doge before Doge was cool. So we've been looking for waste. really using a lot of the same techniques that Elon Musk and Doge have been using for these past really couple of years with a lot of intensity. Found $335 million in waste in state government last year. Everything from cell phones that are being paid for state employees that are never even used, insurance policies on state office buildings that are dramatically more expensive than similar buildings in the state of Florida and what they pay for insurance, just waste in state government. But I'll say this, aside from the waste that we found, the thing that really is frustrating, I think, a lot in the auditor's office is not the waste that we see in government, because that's to be expected. Government is going to be wasteful. Somebody has to stand up and call it out and try to put a stop to it. The thing that's really frustrating a lot of times is when we identify that waste. Sometimes these establishment politicians that are Republicans in Mississippi, they will push back almost like the Democrats are pushing back on Doge in Washington, D.C. So, for example, when we released a big study of government waste last year, the reaction of the state Senate, at least, and one of Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hoseman's key chairmen, was to try to strip the auditor's office of our ability legally to look for waste. This is just kind of crazy to me when you think about what they're willing to do to put a stop to some of this stuff. And it really calls to mind what you're saying, which is we don't have enough people in public life who acknowledge straight out of the gate that they're not the boss. They work for the hundreds of thousands of people who voted to elect them. I'll give you another very simple example. We, this year in the state auditor's office, we asked for $1 million less from the state general fund for our budget in the auditor's office. Now, I don't know. That's the first time I've heard of a government agency asking for less money from the legislature. But the reason we did that is because we work for the taxpayers of Mississippi. And if we can find ways to save them money or operate more efficiently or whatever it may be, let's do that. Let's find ways to do that. I wish more folks thought about it like that and thought less about the politics of the situation. That's what we see a lot in Jackson is, well, you're trying to do this thing that might hurt a program that one of my buddies has benefiting from. So instead of acknowledging the waste or saying, hey, yeah, that's a good thing that you're voluntarily trying to cut your request from the taxpayers, we're instead going to come after your office. That's what we're fighting upstream against. But I tend to think that the taxpayers are on our side in those battles.
That's the same thing that's happening in D.C.
Yep.
You see that exact same thing. Elon Musk is uncovering. I read, it's unbelievable some of the money, that is being just wasted and fraud, where there's people that are well over 100 years old, like on Social Security, are still getting checks. I mean, that's just incredible to think. And it's not just a few people, it's thousands of people.
Yeah.
We're just wasting money.
I'll do you one better. We found that Medicaid was paying for dead folks to be on Medicaid. A couple of years ago, about $600,000 of Medicaid money goes out the door to pay for health care for dead folks. So they're not just 100 years old in Mississippi. They're already dead and passed on, and we're still paying for their health care. That's the kind of stuff that we've been finding for the last 2 or 3 years. And the great thing about Doge is that Elon Musk and Doge effectively work for the president. So when they find stuff like this, they can make changes pretty quickly. So they're cutting off government contracts. They're showing federal employees the door when they don't need to be working there. They're doing things to actually cut the waste. In the state auditor's office, we can find the waste, but we're not allowed to actually change anything. It's just the state auditor's office. All we can do is audit. So it's almost like doing an autopsy on a government program day after day. We could tell you why the body's dead, but we can't do anything to fix the situation. So I'm hopeful at some point that state leadership here in Mississippi will look at some of the stuff that we've been doing and they'll say, okay, you know what? We really do have to make some changes to make sure that the dollars don't flow down the drain in the way that Shad is finding.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that we need more. We need to get rid of more of the waste. And I really appreciate, what Donald Trump and his team is doing in D.C. And I love seeing and hearing about, some of the stuff being exposed, in Mississippi as well, because it saves, the taxpayers money, and it just puts more money back into our pockets.
Yep.
I believe that the citizen, they know how to spend their money much better than the government does.
Yep.
And so we don't need more money going to Jackson or more money going to D.C. We need more money in our own pockets.
That's right.
So whenever it comes to cutting the state income tax, cutting the federal tax, cutting, the gas tax, cutting, grocery taxes, I think all of those are good things. And I don't like the idea of cutting one and raising another.
Yep.
I like the idea of cutting. And so if you're cutting one and raising another, all you're doing is just swapping. You're not doing a legit cut.
Yep.
And I want to see I want to see a cut. I want to see taxes cut, so I can keep more of my money. We
don't need a shell game where we're moving this and that around and trying to get to a cut, especially if some of the tax increases are, a big gas tax increase. That hurts normal working people, like my dad, who's going to put gas in his truck to drive around, go to the oil pumps that he's got to work on every single day. That hurts those folks more than anybody else. So that's what I worry about too, is the shell game of moving tax policy around and just telling voters, hey, trust us, this is going to result in some kind of net tax decrease, especially if you're not fully eliminating the income tax. The crazy thing to me is, again, we keep pointing out a lot of waste in state government. Pointed out, in any given year, between $60 and $144 million of Medicaid money looks like it's going to people who are making too much money to be eligible to be on Medicaid. All right, why aren't we starting the conversation about tax cuts with that right there? How do we cut the fat and then translate those dollars that we save into tax cuts? Why are we talking about raising this tax and raising this tax in order to lower this tax over here? Why aren't we starting with waste? And then look, I think voters have patience. They're willing to see the income tax phased out over many, many years. So let's get to work. Let's actually cut the waste over that same time frame and get money going back into people's pockets. That should be the way we're approaching these questions.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I want to ask you this question. Whenever I'll read the news often. I read articles. My friend Brian is here, and he writes a lot in Ocean Springs, and I read all of his articles and of just uncovering a lot of government waste, government fraud. And I read what you're doing. I read everything that you go out, follow the course on social media, and keep up with what's happening. Mm-hmm. And so you're getting a very strong reputation, in Mississippi, and whenever it comes to fighting waste and fighting fraud. And you see and you hear a lot of people saying a lot of different things, and some people love it and some people don't. You get from both sides. You get some people enjoy it, and some people, they let's go Shad, go, and some people are like, we're going to shut him down.
Yeah.
And so you get both sides. What do you say to the people, whenever they say, to Shad, or to you, or they send you a message, and because we're talking mainly here, this podcast is going to be seen mainly by conservatives, Republicans here in Mississippi, and we'll have a good number of those. We'll watch the show. And so many of them, are many of them are supporting you. I mean, mm-hmm. A lot of them, we get text messages and calls and people are you're getting a lot of good support. What do you say to those people whenever they're, because we're getting people will hammer us and people will say things such, why are you supporting Shad? He's only going after people because he's just trying to build a name for himself, or he's only going after people because and we'll talk about this in a little bit, so I don't want to get into this yet. Sure. But he's going to try to run for governor. What do you say to those type of people? What is the response? What is your response, to those type of people?
Yeah, I wake up every day thinking about how I can do my job well. And the job of the state auditor is to look after our state money, to make sure that it's not stolen, that if it's wasted, that we're highlighting that, and to treat people the same way according to the law every single time. And so I think if I'm doing that, then I'm doing what I was hired by the taxpayers to do. And if somebody doesn't like it, I don't care. It's super simple for me. I learned long ago, and this really started to happen for me when I was in law school. I learned long ago that you just cannot wake up worrying about what other people think. You have to wake up worrying about, am I doing the right thing, and am I doing a good job at the task I have been handed? So I grew up, again, around here, but I went off for law school to Harvard Law School. And as you can imagine, I was one of 3 conservatives up there. And when you're in an environment...
You sure about that? At Harvard, there wasn't war?
We survived. All 3 of us survived. When you're up there and you're surrounded by a lot of people who disagree with you and frankly don't even like you just because of your political beliefs, you have to grow a thick skin pretty quickly. And you have to realize, I don't have to be friends with everybody. I don't have to be liked by everybody. but I need to go to bed every night knowing that I'm living my life in the way that God wants me to. I'm doing right by other people, and if I've got a job to do, I'm doing it well. So that's what I think about every single day. We had a case really early on in my tenure as state auditor. We made 6 arrests. This was back in February of 2020, and I'll tell you this fast story. Made these arrests in the middle of the week, went to church at the end of the week. So my wife and I are there at church on Sunday. We have 3 kids now. At the time, we just had our oldest. And we're there, and the church service ends, organ's playing, and I'm kind of like packing up the bottle and the stuffed goat and all the other stuff that gets thrown around in the pew, and I'm gathering all this stuff up. And this woman in the pew in front of me, who I'd never seen before, turns around and looks at me, and she said, "You're Shad White." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "You're the state auditor." And I said, "Uh-oh." And she said, you arrested those people this week. I saw it in the newspaper. And I said, "Well, agents from my office arrested a few folks this week in this investigation that we've been doing." And she said, "Well, I know one of those people, and you're wrong, and you ought to be ashamed of yourself." She walked off. And I thought, well, happy Sunday to you too. That's the kind of interaction that you get sometimes when you're in this job. And if you try to please everybody all the time, you're going to end up twisting yourself into an intellectual pretzel. I mean, you're going to be miserable your whole life. So going through stuff like that helped me realize I don't have to worry about keeping everybody happy. I don't have to worry about keeping that person happy if they're mad that we arrested their cousin for stealing government funds. I got to worry about doing my job consistently the same way, regardless of who a person is, regardless of how famous they may be or whatever it is, and then the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah. A couple of weeks ago, or last week, we all watched the lieutenant governor faint, there in Jackson. And, the lieutenant governor, there's some talk about him running for governor. At least I've heard, some talk about him potentially, running for governor. And whenever I saw him faint, I mean, I had a lot of different emotions, that went through me as I watched him. I didn't watch it live.
Yep.
I saw, I forget, I don't know who, somebody posted it online, and it looked, I'm just being honest with you, it looked bad. I mean, I'm not sure, I'm sure you've seen the video.
Seen it, yeah.
I mean, it looked bad where he just kind of collapsed over and he went down. I mean, that's not a good thing, and whenever you have, your lieutenant governor, and I'm not sure the lieutenant governor's age, 77, 76 years old, but whenever he went down and I was watching that and I saw that, my question is, whenever you look at the Senate, it's a grueling process to get a bill passed through the Senate. Like, I mean, those guys, for them to get a bill passed through the Senate, and then it goes through the House, and then whenever it comes out and it goes back to the Senate again or back to the House again, and then it goes to, the committees, and it's a dueling process. And it's not something that just happens. I mean, those guys are only up there for maybe 3 or 4 months, but I mean, they're working. Some of those guys are working around the clock, constantly.
Yep.
And then for them to get a bill, to the governor's office for the governor to either sign or veto, or to just let lay, and then it comes in law. What were kind of your thoughts whenever you saw, the lieutenant governor? Kind of what did you think? I know my thoughts. Whenever I'm sitting there watching, the lieutenant governor, and I see that happen. I mean, it's a long process. It's a hard process. You're looking at 4 months of just intense working on bills. I mean, I'm involved in a few bills on my own, and it's some intense, just being involved in trying to get either a bill killed. There's some bills that I'm trying to get killed right now and Jackson, and some bills that I want to see live. And so, but what kind of your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, my first reaction to the video was the same as yours, and first thought of him as a person. And, I didn't see it live either. I saw a video when it kind of popped up and circulated on the internet. Immediately just said a prayer for him and thought, hope he's okay. You're absolutely right. These are challenging, demanding jobs if you do them right. I've seen plenty of folks who don't do it right.
Correct. You're right.
And they don't show up to work. But if you do these jobs correctly, they are demanding jobs. And so my week this week is going to be demanding. I was in the office yesterday. We were walking through a big study of government money going to nonprofits. And so we're constantly trying to figure out how we can get a better handle on telling taxpayers where these dollars go. I'm on the road today seeing you. I'm going to be back in the office tomorrow. This is nonstop. This stuff is nonstop. And we have bills in front of the legislature, so I'm constantly talked to a state senator this morning on the phone, constantly talking to legislators, working that process. And then you can imagine if you're governor, it doesn't stop once the legislative session is over. We're going to get hit by hurricanes and tornadoes. You're going to have to travel outside of the state to convince somebody to move a bunch of jobs to Mississippi. I mean, these are grueling jobs. And so we all have to be reflective every single day. Am I in a position to do this job well? And then the voters ultimately judge you on that basis. That's the bottom line.
I want to transition to this because this is what I kind of want to talk a little bit about.
Sure.
You know, and that is the governor. Not the governor now, Tate Reeves, which I love our governor. And so, you know, but I'm talking about 2027.
Yep.
We're in 2025, and so it's February, about to be March. And so I know that no one has officially announced that they're running for governor. I mean, but there's a lot of talk.
Yeah.
And I love talking about who's going to run for governor, who I want to be the next governor.
This is like right after football, right? Everybody loves talking about football, and then we love talking about who's going to be governor.
That's right.
Underneath
Well,
that.
well, for me, it's church,
Yeah.
football, governor.
Yeah.
And so then you have lieutenant governor, which, you know, in Mississippi, which I wish everybody understood this in Mississippi, that lieutenant governor is a very important position for Mississippi.
Yeah. Sure.
And then you have secretary of state. And people on the coast just doesn't realize how important the secretary of state is for the coast.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a huge position for the coast of Mississippi. And then you have the attorney general, which is obviously a very important position. You have the state auditor, very important position. You have the insurance commissioner. You have the ag commissioner. And you have the state treasurer. And so you have all of those 8 statewide. 2027 is fast approaching. And I know a lot of people don't want to announce, and I'm not asking you to announce on the show today whether or not you're running, you know, for governor or not, but I am going to ask you here in a few moments. And so I would not be doing a good job if I did not ask you. And so here's what I do like. I do like the fact that you're 39 years old. I like that. I like the fact that you're very young, which is good. We need more young people involved in the political system. And so if we're not careful, the Republican Party, we're going to lose the Republican Party if we don't get more young voters and more young people in office. Mm-hmm. You are the youngest state auditor that we've ever had in the state of Mississippi, you know, which is a good thing. I don't see anything wrong with that. Are you going to run for governor? Are you thinking about running for governor? And then I got a few more questions about that, but let's talk about that first. What are your thoughts on the governor, and what are you're looking for? Because you're doing a great job at raising money. I mean, honestly, I mean, I read the reports, and I mean, you was, I think, number one. Yep. You know, you number one, Lynn was number 2, and then I mean, Delbert was and she was close. I mean, she's right there by you, and then you had the lieutenant governor was a distant third, which you could thank Chris McDaniel and his supporters for that, because we made him spend, you know, a ton of money in 2023, right. And so what are your thoughts on you running for governor personally?
Yeah, I've made no secret that I'm seriously considering running for governor. And really, for me, it starts with this big question of why. I wake up every day and I see the massive amount of waste that we have in state government, the inefficiency, the brokenness. I see, unfortunately, relaxed campaign finance laws and political corruption that seems to lurk around every corner. Somebody's got to step up and change some of that kind of stuff. And then once you do that, you've got to get serious about getting that money, especially taxpayer money, going to where it can make a big difference for us. So for me and for you, that's tax cuts to drive our economy forward. It's paying cops what we need to be paying them. We still, unfortunately, have the highest per capita homicide rate of any state in the entire country, according to federal data. That's not good. And it's not just Jackson. Jackson is dangerous and has record high homicides, but it's other places in Mississippi. We've got too much money going to administrative waste in our K-12 school system, not enough getting to the classroom and getting to teachers. We seem to put aside parents' concerns in our education system. I mean, we've got folks who are working their whole lives. They pay taxes. Their kids grow up in Mississippi and they go off to some of our Mississippi universities, and then the parents got to watch their taxpayer funds indoctrinate their kids into some of the craziest ideologies that you've ever seen. Not prepare their kids to have a great career, but instead indoctrinate their kids into just absolutely insane ideologies, whether it's DEI offices on campus or the gender studies majors or whatever it is, gender studies programs. That's the kind of stuff that I wake up thinking about, is that our government can operate better for taxpayers, and we're just not doing it. We just need a huge dose of common sense. So you talked about, do we need younger people in politics? For me, I really think less about that, and I think more about this question of how do we get people with common sense into politics? How do we start spending our money in a way that conforms with common sense? Stop funding some of this nonsense at our universities and get the money go into degree programs that make a difference in kids'
that DEI
lives.
stuff, all of it needs to be defunded.
It's absolutely insane.
100%.
And I think what voters in other states are saying is that you don't have to elect the person who's been around the longest to find somebody with good common sense. So Arkansas elects the youngest governor in America.
She's doing a great job.
She's doing an incredible job.
She's awesome.
I talked to her in October, and then I actually drove up to Little Rock on my own dime, no taxpayer funds expended, drove up to Little Rock on my own dime and met with her staff in Little Rock just to pepper them with questions about how they're doing what they're doing up there. And so you see young governors like that really doing an incredible job for their states. Governor DeSantis in Florida, 42-year-old governor when he comes in, overwhelmingly reelected after he comes in. There are other young folks who are talking about running for governor in Alabama right now, for example. So we'll see, but I think that voters around the South and in red states are saying we're not going to be content to just vote for the next person up, the person whose turn it is. We're going to look under the hood. We're going to see who has ideas that fit with our values, who's got the energy and the tenacity to do this job the right way, and then we're going to pick that person.
So let me ask you this question. Why governor and not lieutenant governor?
Both are important in Mississippi. Both are important. Historically, you made a really good point that under our Constitution, the lieutenant governor's office is very, very powerful.
Correct.
You basically control the state Senate. You control committee chairmanships. You control
appropriations.
You control how bills get referred to committee, so you can basically kill any bill that you want to, or you can grease the skids and send it to a single committee, and a bill is more likely to flow through at that point. I will say this. A lot of the work that I've done as state auditor is looking at how the agencies themselves operate and finding inefficiencies and brokenness inside those state agencies. So that's a lot of what a governor does on a day-to-day basis. The other thing I would say is, the governor's office in Mississippi, I think, is actually more powerful today than at any time in our lives. One is that the line item veto has been basically resurrected by Governor Tate Reeves. He had a court case against the legislature and has used the line item veto to cut wasteful spending. So that's one reason the governor's office is now a little bit more powerful in Mississippi. And then number two, as politicians and elected officials are able to communicate more effectively by social media, the governor has the biggest bully pulpit. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. Far more than the AG or the lieutenant governor or anybody else. And so if you want to command the biggest bully pulpit, if you want to drive an agenda, you can make an argument that today, using social media, the governor's office has a greater ability to do that than ever before. 30, 40 years ago, if you really wanted to be elected governor in Mississippi, you better hope that the editorial board of the Clarion Ledger really likes you a whole lot. Now what you need is the ability to communicate effectively directly to your voters, whether it's on X or Facebook or whatever it may be.
I believe that's how Donald Trump won.
Absolutely.
I believe Donald Trump is the president today because of social media.
Absolutely.
Because you're right. The media, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, all of these guys were 100% opposed to Donald Trump. And if it wasn't for Donald Trump's social media, whether it's Facebook or whenever he got back on, or maybe X or TikTok, or a lot of these social media platforms that Donald Trump was involved in, Truth, just getting out his message, because the media is not going to help. The media isn't going to help him get out his message. They're going to do everything they can to undercut, lie, all that they can to try to destroy him.
We see that in Mississippi too, on a much smaller scale. Again, my experience in the last year and a half it speaks to that. I've been sued to stop me from looking for waste or recovering taxpayer funds. The legislature's tried to gut my authority. The establishment has had their liberal buddies in the media write hit pieces on me. This all should sound very familiar. But the good thing for us is that I don't have to depend on, one news outlet to get my message out. I can go straight to voters and explain to them, this is what I'm doing, this is why I'm doing it, and this is why it's important to you. And if you can do that effectively, I mean, you're going to be fine. You're going to succeed because people are going to be happy with what you're doing and they're going to back you.
Well, Donald Trump said, he said it to the people. He said, "You are the media." You know, is what Donald Trump said. And so every single one of you, that's why I do this podcast. Yep. You know, it is because it helps, you know, connect conservatives and it helps get out our message. So the people of Mississippi, the conservatives, the Republicans, whoever wants to, can listen, can educate themselves. And I like what Donald Trump said, you are the media, and you help us by getting out our message. And so because the liberal media is definitely not going to help us. Is there any person that, because I mean, there's lots of names about governor, right? There's, I think Lynn Fitch is considering running for governor. Philip Gunn, I've heard his name running for governor. I've heard Andy Gibson. I don't know if he's going to run or not. I've heard the Lieutenant Governor, Delbert Hosemann, potentially running for governor. There's Tommy Duff is considered running for governor. I mean, there's a lot of people looking to throw their name in the hat. My personal opinion, I'm just giving my personal opinion. My personal opinion is the more people you have in a race, the better it is for the conservative, in my opinion, because you'll kind of split up, you know, you'll kind of split up that other vote. And so it's kind of my opinion. Some people would disagree. Some people would agree. You know, it could be one or the other, but I kind of think that. But is there any one person that if they were to get in the race, is there, and maybe you don't want to, I don't know, but is there one person that makes you more nervous than the next as far as getting in the race?
No, and I really don't think about it like that. I tend to think, you know, number one, is my vision for the future of the state connecting with people. So I've set it out right here, right now. It's we need to cut the fat. We need to get the money going to where it's going to make the biggest difference to our voters. And we need a government that conforms to our values here in Mississippi. We don't need to be funding this woke, crazy stuff. We need to get money going to the places that fit our common sense values. As I talk about that stuff, what I look for is I'm looking to see if people are nodding their heads in the room or if they think this guy's kind of crazy. Now, like 2 years ago, there were definitely days where I woke up and I thought, am I the only one that cares that this money is being wasted? You know, we would have some studies that would come out and they would find, you know, Mississippi spends more on travel costs than Louisiana or Arkansas or Iowa, similar states that have a similar population are also rural. And you look around and you think, does no one care about this? Nobody going to do anything about this at all. And so those were tough days when you're producing these findings and nobody cares. But now what I started to realize is that real people out in the country, they really do care about this kind of stuff. And DOJ has shown that. When normal people are like, yeah, I want my tax dollars to stop flowing to this crazy thing, or yeah, we need to be more efficient in this agency. That's the kind of thing that I look at when I'm debating about what to do in the future, because that shows me, hey, voters here in Mississippi, they want to see the things that you're talking about. They want to see that come to fruition. And really, you know, you keep working, you keep talking about your vision for the future of the state. I keep trying to do my job well. And then you look up when it's time to decide and when it's time to announce, and you see, okay, do enough people support me, and do I have the resources in my campaign to run a real campaign to win this thing? And that's when you make up your mind. And really it has less to do with who's on the other side of the fence and who's waiting for you, and more about, am I going to run my game plan well? Sort of like a football team too. I mean, at first, the first step is to make sure that you got your playbook down and you can run your plays. And then you worry about who's on the other side, right?
So you mentioned resources. One thing that let's say conservatives have struggled with in Mississippi whenever it comes to running for office is raising money.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know how else to ask this question, but just ask it like this. You know, Senator Chris McDaniel, he's a friend. He has struggled raising money. Mm-hmm. You know, in the last race for lieutenant governor, we struggled raising money. We raised, I think, a little over $1 million. The lieutenant governor spent I think he had over $7 million. And he had to spend every penny of it. Yep. And we spent, you know, every penny of ours. How have you been Tate Reeves did very well raising money. The governor, he never struggled raising money. And it seems that you are somehow, and you don't have to tell us your playbook. But I am curious how you are because you are doing a really good job. It seems from me looking from the outside looking in, because I mean, I saw your finance report. You're doing a really good job at raising money. and I would consider you a very strong conservative. And I don't use the word strong conservative lightly.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't just say that for anybody, because I do believe that you are that 100%. And you're doing very well at raising money. How are you able to do something that it seems that other strong conservatives have not been able to do?
The first thing that I would say is that you have to operate your campaign like a business, and you have to not spend money. So when we raise money, we do our best to not spend it. So if you go and we call it burn rate, how much money are you spending divided by the amount that you actually raised? Our burn rate in my campaign account is typically below 15%, 15% or lower. So when we raise money, we just don't spend it. We save it, and we say, all right, this is going to be for a future election when I need it. And your donors like that, by the way. When they see that they've given you $100, and you said, all right, I need to spend 15 of it on postage and for this thing over here, like maybe we need to send out an invite to the next fundraiser, but the rest of it I'm saving. Your donors like that, and they're going to be more willing to write you the second check after that. So that's the first thing I would say, is you have to be frugal with your own operation. The second thing I would say is, if you're a conservative, if you're a strong conservative, you cannot just wake up and think, I'm going to go to all the lobbyists in Jackson and they're going to fund my campaign. They're just not going to do it. They're not going to do that. Some of them may give you some money, and it may be because they like you personally or because they secretly agree with you on something or whatever it may be, but you can't rely on that. So what you have to do is you have to go out in the state and you have to tell business owners, normal people, doctors, nurses, the local CPA, the local lawyer, the local teacher, the principal, whatever it is, you have to tell people in the community, in your state, all around, why you're doing what you're doing. And then you've got to have the nerve to ask them, so when you have that conversation with that guy who owns his own car dealership and has built himself up, at the end of it, if he's saying, I agree with you, that waste is a problem. I wish you would, I hope that you'll run for whatever it may be, governor or something else, and I support you, then you got to ask them for money. You got to say, if you want me to do that, then I need your help to have the resources to run a campaign. Otherwise, it's just empty words. And most folks, when you put it to them that way, they're going to understand, and they're going to donate to your campaign. Now, if you're a strong conservative, you have to do a lot more of that, a lot at a higher rate, and you have to make that ask many, many more times than your kind of establishment politicians who are going to pick up the phone and call 3 people and raise $500,000. But if you're willing to work and you're willing to do it, then you can mount a serious campaign. So that's just the kind of approach that I take to it.
So whenever it comes to you ultimately making that decision, right, to run for governor, which you have time. I mean, it's
2 years out. Yeah, we got time.
2 years out, you got time. But I mean, we're all talking about it. Everybody's talking about it. I don't go to no event where somebody doesn't ask me, who do you think's running for governor, or who do you want to run for governor? And I'm like, I want Donald Trump to move to Mississippi and run for governor. So
don't we all? I'm for that.
That's what I want.
I'll be his VP.
Yeah, let Donald Trump come. But so whenever you're looking at that, so whenever you're going to make your decision, like when it comes to leadership, whenever it comes to people that because we all have people that we look to, people that we get advice from, people that we lean on, whenever we have to make decisions, and as a pastor, whenever it comes to my church, I have several pastors that I go to, and one is my dad. I get to go to my dad. He's been pastoring Faith Baptist Church for 40 years. And so I can go to him and ask him questions. And then I have a lot of other friends. Who is someone that you look to for that spiritual guidance, that leadership, that advice, somebody that you would call and say, like whenever it comes to making a decision like running for governor, like how would you go about, making that decision outside of the playbook, the money, outside of that, how I want to get in Shad's brain. Like what would cause you to, or who would you talk to?
Yeah. For really any tough decision, actually. I mean, that's the big question
absolutely.
of life, is who you're leaning on. I'll say this to begin. My 2 heroes growing up were my grandfathers. And so neither is alive today, but I think a lot like the 2 of them, and their path through life was very inspiring to me. So when I'm thinking about tough decisions, I'm thinking, what would make them proud? What's the kind of thing what would they do in this situation? So my 2 grandfathers, just to tell you a little bit, both served in the military. It's the reason I wanted to serve in the military too. my my mom's dad fought in World War II. And so he was very close to me when I was a little boy. He had a stroke when I was a little boy and could not speak for much of my childhood after he had a stroke. But he would always, anytime I saw him, he would always take my hand and put it on the back of his neck so I could feel the scar where he got hit with Nazi shrapnel and earned a Purple Heart and came home. He would, pull his desk drawer out and show me his Purple Heart. And I now have that Purple Heart, and I'm going to give it to my son one day. Those are the kinds of things that stick with me when I'm making tough decisions, because I think he was trying to tell me that service to your country and your community is important. And when you're in a job like this, you have to place that as the highest possible priority. So I think a lot about those people in my life that have played that role along the way. Today, my grandfathers are not with us. They're in heaven. But, when I'm asking somebody for advice, my first person that I'm asking is my wife every single time. My wife is brilliant. I don't use the word genius lightly, but she is. She's the smartest person I've ever met. She's also beautiful, and she's a great mother, and she has an incredible amount of common sense too. And so when I'm struggling over something to do, 9 times out of 10, I can be exasperated and throw my hands up and say, this is what's going on. I don't know what to do with that. And the first thing that comes out of her mouth is just the obvious solution that I have missed. So I lean a lot on my wife for advice and guidance. And then I've got a few people who are really close to me, and they're mainly folks who are either used to work in the auditor's office or still do work in the auditor's office. So my chief of staff, Charles Woods, is a young guy, best strategic thinker I've ever met. He's a military veteran who just came back from his second deployment, has commanded troops in Syria. And so when it comes down to a strategy question, Charles is always one of the first people I go to. My former chief of staff, who used to work at the auditor's office, a guy named Bill Pope, has been around for forever in Mississippi politics. And Bill is the kind of guy who would never agree to do a podcast interview because he knows everything about Mississippi politics, and he wouldn't spill the tea on anybody. But he has seen so much in Mississippi politics that if I ever say, Bill, this is what's going on, he can tell me, well, yeah, you could do it that way, but in 1976, that got so-and-so kicked out of office, or that got him, that made him lose the election, or whatever it is. And that's the kind of person that you need in your corner, like the old hand, the guy that's been around for forever and can say, hey, that's not a wise decision. Think about it this way or that way.
Nice. How long have you been married?
Oh, man, this has been a fun interview. I appreciate it. Now we get to the hard questions. I got married in 2017. Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah,
good.
7 years. Yeah.
Awesome. 7 years. That's awesome. I know you went to Harvard.
Yep.
And you got out of Harvard, and then you moved back to Mississippi.
Yep. And
then you you're a JAG officer now.
Yeah, correct.
So,
yeah.
Awesome.
Correct. Yeah.
Good deal.
It was an interesting transition. When I was in law school, you have like a week where all these law firms from Wall Street and from DC and from Chicago and all over, they come to campus and they interview all the law students. And the job placement rate is 100%. So everybody's going to get a job at the end of it. And so you sit there and you do these law firm interviews, or at least most people do. And at that point in my life, I knew that I wanted to be back in Mississippi. So I decided to completely skip that week of interviews in law school. And instead, I flew home to Mississippi, and I set up my own interviews with Mississippi law offices and did the interviews. And I even had one law office tell me, like, look, it's great that you're here. We're not going to hire you for a summer internship, and we're not going to think about hiring you for a job because you're not going to come back to Mississippi. And I had to tell them, no, I just turned down every interview for every other national law firm so I could come and be here with you. So if you're not going to hire me, I'm going to be living under a bridge somewhere. Like, this is it for me. I've burned the boats behind me. I want to come back home. And luckily they believed me and ended up giving me a summer offer and then a job offer at the end of it. But that's how dedicated you have to be if you go off to one of these law schools, is that you got to really want to come back home to Mississippi and make a difference here.
Nice. Man, I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
But before we close, there's several people here that are watching. I don't know if they have any questions that they would like to ask. There's just a few guys here with me.
Your son's here, too.
My son's here.
Just to clarify, you committed to running for governor today.
Unfortunately not. I'm not committing today, but I appreciate the emphasis on that. Yeah.
When you identify all of the waste and fraud, the main person responsible for taking the torch and eliminating that would be which office?
If it's a criminal fraud case, that has to be a prosecutor who will take it from us. So it could be your local DA, it could be the Attorney General's office, or it could be the federal prosecutor. So that's if it's a criminal case. Now, there's a lot of stuff that we find that is not criminal. It's not theft, but it is waste. It's just money that is spent in a way that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so really, if you're talking about who's responsible for cutting that waste, it's lawmakers and it's agency heads. Sometimes the agency heads can make the changes on their own. Sometimes we need a change to the law to change the way that money is being spent. But that really is the greater magnitude of what we're finding right now. So we've recovered about $75 million of stolen or misspent money, which is great. I'm very proud of it. $75 million in 6 years is more money that has been recovered than any other 6-year period in the history of the state. But compare that to the amount of waste that we found. A little over $400 million of waste. So beyond just the theft, there's a bunch of money that's just going down the drain. It's not doing any good for anybody. And that's the stuff that's got to stop.
Wow.
Good luck with that.
So in the next 10 years, where do you see Mississippi going with like the change in technologies with AI and all that? How do we make Mississippi a more competitive state?
Great question. It's a great question. Mississippi has a ton of intrinsic advantages over the course of the next 10 years. We have land that is cheap. We have utility companies that are clearly willing to build power plants here in Mississippi. And we have a governor in the last 8 years, really the last 2 governors, who have been eager to recruit businesses to come to Mississippi. And so that's why you see 2 big, massive data centers move to Mississippi, one in Madison County, one in Meridian. $10 billion capital expenditure by those companies. They're the 2 biggest economic development projects in state history, and they happened back to back, bam, bam. So we've got to capitalize on that. The next step for us as a state economy is how do we transform our universities into places of learning that are producing the workers that those tech companies need. So we have to stop wasting money on garbage at our universities. We have to start focusing on majors that actually matter. And then we got to do a better job of convincing those young people to stay here and work here. And if we can get just a decent percentage of those folks to stay, you're going to see these tech companies who are going to want to invest in Mississippi. And Mississippi could very easily look a lot like South Carolina does. They've had explosive economic growth in the last 20 years. We were very similar states back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. We very easily could leapfrog forward and get into that position, but we got to be smarter about how we handle taxpayer resources to get there.
I got one question.
Come on.
So a lot of people you've inspired to look at their own local governments, and people are finding fraud, waste, and abuse, theft, crimes, corruption. How does the average citizen who cares about their city and corruption that is happening in their city get the attention of someone like you?
It's easy to get our attention just because we'll take any tip that anybody has. So we have a fraud hotline, a 1-800 number that people can call. We've got an online form that people can fill out. The real thing that we encourage, especially for folks at the local level, is, if you find something, it's easy to get it to us. The tricky part is finding it, right? So we don't have enough people at the local level who are showing up to city council meetings, who are showing up to board of supervisors meetings. And in my office, we've got between 20 and 25 investigators given the week, depending on what time it is. We can't be everywhere at once. So we rely on local folks, whistleblowers, people out in the real world to give us information, and that's what we encourage from people: is have courage, stand up, ask tough questions, and if you see something that doesn't make sense, come tell us.
Yeah, Brian's done a really good job at exposing a lot of corruption and waste in some cities here on the coast. Once again, Shad, thanks for coming in, man. I really appreciate you coming in, and I know you're busy. I know you got 10 million things going on, but thanks for making time to come by Freedom Frontline and talk about things that matter to every Mississippian.
Yeah.
And whatever you decide in 2027, we appreciate it. And of course, we'll be praying for you.
Thanks.
I know I personally pray for you every day.
Yeah.
Pray for you and your family.
Thank
and
you.
just Lord, just continue to lead you and direct you.
That's the biggest thing you can do, and that's the biggest thing I need right now. Yeah.
Well, thanks, man. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for tuning in. If you watched today and if you enjoyed it, I would encourage you to share. That helps us get around the different algorithms on social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, whether it's Substack, Instagram, wherever you're watching this podcast or listening to this podcast. I would encourage you to share it It helps us get out our message and the message of conservatism. So thank you. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless the great United States of America.